welcome. My name is Chris from ChristopherHall.com, and in this little series of videos I'm going to be talking to you about running and low back pain. Now, in my experience, there are a lot of runners out there who do experience low back pain, not only whilst they run, but when once they finish running, so sort of after running. And I just want to put these few little videos together to help you, in a way, understand why that's happening, and also some sort of ideas and solutions to maybe overcome that low back pain, or certainly reduce it. So in this first video, what I'd like to talk about is the prime mover during running. And the muscles that we need to be focusing on whilst we're running are the muscles of the hip, and not necessarily the muscles of the leg. Now, obviously, the muscles of the leg, the quads, the hamstrings, the calf, the foot, those are obviously essential elements and components of running. But one or a series of muscles that tend to get forgotten are the gluteal muscles, so glute max, glute medius, glute minimus, plus some other hip extension, hip external rotators deeper in the hip as well. But the main three, the glute maximus, the glute medius, and the glute minimus. What we have to do is we have to use those as the prime mover. And the reason we have to use those as the prime mover is, as you can see in this picture here, in our runner, we've got a hip here, that is known as hip flexion. So if you've got a body upright and then you've got your hip coming down through here, that's known as the hip being in flexion. What we've also got here is the hip, which is now in extension. So as you stride through, you go into hip extension, but as you lift your leg, you go into hip flexion. So that's what hip flexion and extension are, and that's what your hips are doing. Now, there tends to be more hip flexion and extension from the hip than there is at the knee. So what we need to be focusing our training and our activity doing is firing and activating the glute maximus, the muscles at the back of the hip. Because what the glute maximus do, not only do they propel you forward, because they are very big, strong, powerful muscles, but what they also do is they can act as like a shock absorber. So as your foot hits the ground, obviously the shock's going to go up through your ankle, through your knee, and up into your hip. Now, the glute max, the glute minimus, and the glute medius, they can help reduce that stress on the hip, so it doesn't manifest itself as low back pain, if you can follow what I'm sort of getting at. So they sort of act as a shock absorber to disperse the shock that goes up through the leg when we strike the floor. What we also get from that is something called gluteal amnesia. Now, gluteal amnesia is basically the glute muscles that are falling asleep and they're not working properly. So what that allows to happen is the shock to go right up through the hip into the lower back and manifest itself as low back pain. So the first sort of principle and idea of exercise for low back pain when it comes to running is focusing on the hip muscles and getting those nice and active. So what they can do is they can reduce the load and the pressure on the lower part of the back. So what we're going to talk about in the next video is we're going to look at the core, and then in video number 3 we're going to look at the hamstrings. Okay, I will speak to you in video number 2.